So Dad, since you told me a few days ago that you'd never sweated copper pipe, I'm making this video so you can see how it's done in appreciation for all the years of construction advice that you've given me. So here it goes. Okay, first I've basically nailed everything into place. I've got all my fittings sanded down and fitted with flux. So that's this stuff here. It's pretty simple, cheap to buy. Just put that on each of the fittings with a brush after sanding them down. And take your trusty torch and your solder here. I've basically cut it off the roll so that it's easier to feed it as I go. Just makes it that much easier to keep going. You don't want to have to stop constantly with the torch going. Basically, I'm going to do these two fittings first. These elbows, you can see some of these are already soldered. All the pieces that I could do outside of the final placement is a lot easier. So these are the trickier solders because I have to do them while it's in place. So I basically got 4 to do. I've got this elbow, these 2 edges, this elbow, this 3rd elbow, and then the most difficult is going to be this one back in the corner. Hopefully I won't do too much scorching on the wood back here. So I'm going to go from easiest to hardest just so that I can kind of save the hard one for last. Okay, this is just a standard, I think it's a benzene torch. It's really easy to operate. It's got a little nozzle here, and then you can use a match, a lighter, or I like this sparker because it's a little bit easier to get it started. Once you get it started, you want to try and get it adjusted not too high, especially when you're doing soldering in place. And here we go. Basically just going to heat these sides while I can. I like to heat them for maybe 10 to 15 seconds. That gives you a good start. And then what I'll do, you notice I'm not actually heating the part where the solder is going to go, but actually in between. What the flux does is it actually sucks the solder into place. So you'll see as it starts to, once it hits the right temperature, the solder will just start getting sucked right into place. Not quite hot enough yet. Depending on the fitting, sometimes it takes a while for it to get hot enough for the solder to start melting. But the key is just to keep at it, keep the torch rotating, and when the solder is ready, it'll start sucking it right in. Okay, I'm going to move on to this next one. That one's not going too easily, so I'm just going to move on to the next one. Come back to that one later. Okay, there we go. I don't know if you can see it from that angle, but the solder is just getting pulled right into the fitting here. So I'm just doing circles to try and make sure it gets sucked in evenly all around. Once it starts to melt, you don't have to keep the heat on the entire time, but it's good to bring it back around just to make sure it doesn't cool down. Because once it cools down, it's pretty much solid. So you want to keep going, putting heat every now and again to make sure it doesn't cool off. You'll know that it's completely filled once the joint stops sucking in solder, and you'll notice that some of the solder is kind of dripping down below. So that's a good sign that it's almost got enough solder in the joint. Since I don't want to have to resolder these, I'm going to make sure that I get as much as possible in the joint. I definitely want to seal all the cracks, all the crevices. And so now that I've got this hot, I can just go right over to this next one. And even though it's vertical, you notice I'm trying to solder this piece, and the flux is helping suck the solder upward into the joint. So even though it's kind of going against gravity, that's what the flux helps to do. And that's also why you keep the elbow above the point where you actually want the solder to go, because that creates a vacuum where it sucks the solder into place. So again, I'm just going around and around, trying to cover every side of the joint. And a lot of it's looks like it's pretty close to full since it's not taking too much more. Okay, this one's already done, so I'm going to go to this one. This should be the easier one since it's not too close to the others. And you can just see it starting to suck the solder in now. So I'll pull this away and just let the flux pull the solder into place. Add a little heat every second or two. Make sure you get the back side, and be careful because the whole pipe is going to be hot and you don't want to touch it. Obviously I'm wearing gloves to help with the heat. It's a little bit harder when you have to hold the pieces, but having it mounted like this, it's actually easier because you can hold the flux or hold the solder with one hand and hold the torch with the other. When you're doing it in another surface, sometimes you have to try and balance holding the torch, the solder, and the pipe, so it can be a little tricky. And I'm doing this other joint. A lot of this solder is, it's just dripping onto the concrete below. It's not really a problem because once it cools down, it actually flakes really easily, so it's easy to pull up. I have just some basic cardboard here under the piping, just so I don't get it on the tub, so I don't want to have to scrape it off the tub. But like I said, it flakes pretty easily, so it's not too difficult to get up. And as you can see, these joints heated up and soldered pretty quickly. That first one, not so much so, but you just move on to the next one and come back to it. Sometimes it can be a little tricky getting just the right temperature for the solder to melt. Okay, it looks like it's starting to come out, so I think I've got enough here. Again, it's much better to do a little extra than too little, because you don't want these things to leak after you finish the job. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this first one I think what might have happened is this hot water line is actually still dripping water a little bit, and I think that is interfering with the flux, and that's stopping it from heating up enough. But I'm going to give it another go and see if I can get it going. If not, I'll just have to turn the torch off, pull the pipe apart, and then put some more flux on. Okay, it just doesn't look like it's going to go. Alright, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to have to readjust this one, put some more flux on it, maybe sand it down again. I'll have to wait for it to cool, but fortunately these are still loose so I can pull these off. But the other 3 joints look like they're adhering pretty well. They cool pretty quickly, but you can see it looks like all the gaps are filled, and hopefully the cold water line will work. I'll adjust the hot water line and then give that another shot.